In the grand theater of world literature, few adventures blaze as brightly as those we share, here on Echoes of Stories. Tonight, the shadows rise to reveal one of the greatest epics ever penned, the Count of Monte Cristo by the legendary Alexandre Dumas. First appearing in serial form in 1844, this timeless classic has enchanted readers for generations, spinning a tale of betrayal, vengeance, and ultimate redemption. The version you're about to hear is drawn from the public domain archives of Project Gutenberg, preserved in all its enduring glory. And now, the stage is set, the curtain rises. This is The Count of Monte Cristo, Episode 5. After making their way through the subterranean passage with relative ease, though it was too low for them to stand upright, Dantès and his companion reached the far end of the corridor. Here, the abbé's cell opened. From that point, the passage narrowed even more, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. The floor of the abbé's cell was paved. In one dim corner, Faria had raised a single stone to begin the long and laborious work, the final stages of which Dantès had recently witnessed. As he stepped inside his friend's chamber, Dantès cast a searching, eager glance, hoping to see wonders. But nothing unusual appeared before him. The abbé explained that they had several hours ahead, noting that it was precisely 12:15. This made Dantès turn instinctively, wondering how his friend could tell the exact time without a watch. The abbé pointed to a narrow beam of sunlight entering through the window and to a series of lines traced on the wall. By their alignment with the Earth's double motion and the elliptical path it described around the sun, he could determine the hour with a precision beyond that of any timepiece, which could break or lose accuracy, while the sun and Earth never strayed from their appointed paths. This explanation left Dantès baffled. All his life, he had believed that the sun itself moved, rising from behind the mountains and setting in the Mediterranean. The idea of a double movement of the globe, one he could not feel, seemed impossible. Every word from the abbé's lips felt rich with mysterious science, as precious and worth uncovering as gold and diamonds hidden deep in the mines of Gujarat and Golconda, places he faintly recalled visiting in his youth. His eagerness soon turned to curiosity about the abbé's treasures. Faria responded with a knowing smile and moved to the disused fireplace. With his chisel, he lifted a long stone, once the hearth, revealing a deep cavity. This was the hidden vault where he stored his prized possessions. The abbé asked what his friend wished to see first. Dantès, without hesitation, requested the great work on the monarchy of Italy. From the hiding place, Faria drew 3 or 4 rolls of linen, layered like ancient papyrus. Each strip measured about 4 inches wide and 18 inches long, numbered carefully and filled with neat, legible writing in Italian, a language Dantès, as a Provençal, understood perfectly. The abbé noted that the final word had been written on the 68th strip only a week earlier. 2 shirts and several handkerchiefs had been sacrificed to provide enough material. Should freedom ever come, and a bold printer in Italy be found to publish it, the abbé was certain his literary reputation would be secure. Dantès studied the pages, then turned his attention to the unusual pens used to write them. The abbé produced a slender stick, about 6 inches long, resembling the handle of a fine paintbrush. To one end, tied with thread, was a cartilage shaped to a nib and split like an ordinary pen. Dantès admired the craftsmanship, then searched for the tool that had shaped it. The abbé revealed what he considered his masterpiece, a penknife, sharp as a razor, fashioned from an old iron candlestick. Alongside it lay a larger knife, suited both for cutting and thrusting. Dantès examined these implements with the same fascination he had once felt in Marseilles, looking at the strange tools brought from the South Seas by trading vessels. The abbé reminded him that the ink was made as needed from materials he had once explained. Still, one puzzle remained for Dantès: how all this work had been done by daylight. Faria revealed that he also worked at night. This surprised Dantès, who could not imagine how one could see in the dark without the eyes of a cat. The abbé replied that intelligence allowed man to overcome the limits of nature. He had created light by separating the fat from the meat served to him, melting it, and turning it into oil. He fashioned a lamp. It resembled a torch used in public celebrations. To ignite it, he used 2 flints and a piece of charred linen. Matches were unnecessary. He had feigned a skin disorder and requested sulfur, which was readily provided. Dantès placed the various items he had examined onto the table. He stood with his head bowed, as if weighed down by admiration for the perseverance and strength of Faria's mind. Yet the abbé explained that there was still more to see. Not all his treasures were hidden in one place. The first cache was carefully closed. Together, they set the stone back into position. A sprinkling of dust concealed any sign it had been moved, and the abbé pressed his foot firmly on it to match the surrounding surface. He then moved to his bed and shifted it aside. Behind the head of the bed, fitted so precisely that no suspicion could arise, was a stone concealing a hollow space. Inside lay a rope ladder between 25 and 30 feet in length. Dantès examined it eagerly. It was strong, tightly woven, and capable of supporting any weight. The abbé revealed that the ladder had been made from torn shirts and thread pulled from the seams of bed sheets during 3 years of imprisonment at Fenestrelle. When he had been transferred to the Château d'If, he had brought the unraveled fibers with him, eventually completing the ladder here. The missing hems on the sheets had gone unnoticed, for once the thread was removed, the edges had been sewn over again, stitched with a needle made from sharpened fish bone, perforated for thread, a fragment of which still clung to it. At one point, the abbé had considered removing the iron bars from his window, which was slightly wider than Dantès'. He had planned to enlarge it further to escape, but abandoned the idea upon discovering that it only opened onto an inner court. The risk was too great. Still, the ladder was preserved for one of those rare, unforeseen opportunities that chance might bring. While his eyes seemed fixed on the ladder, Dantès' mind was elsewhere. He wondered if someone as intelligent, inventive, and perceptive as the abbé could unravel the dark mystery of his own misfortune, a mystery Dantès himself could not solve. The abbé noticed his thoughtful expression and assumed it was the natural awe of one who had seen such wonders. Dantès reflected on the immense intelligence and skill his companion possessed, and how much he might have achieved in freedom. Faria replied that perhaps nothing would have been accomplished at all. Freedom might have let his thoughts scatter into trivial pursuits. Misfortune, he believed, compressed the powers of the mind, just as pressure was needed to ignite gunpowder. Captivity had concentrated his intellect to a sharp focus, producing mental illumination as surely as lightning emerged from the clash of clouds. Dantès admitted that some of the abbé's words were beyond his understanding, and marveled at the knowledge his friend possessed. Faria, with a faint smile, reminded him that there had been another subject in his thoughts. Dantès agreed, and explained that while the abbé had shared the story of his own past, he knew nothing of Dantès' life. The abbé remarked that such a young man could hardly have passed through significant events, but Dantès answered that his years had been enough to bring him a great and undeserved misfortune. He longed to trace its source to human malice, so that he might cease to reproach heaven. He swore by the 2 beings he loved most, his father and Mercedes, that he was ignorant of the crime with which he had been charged. The abbé then closed the secret compartment, pushed the bed back into place, and invited Dantès to tell his story. Dantès complied and began recounting what he called his history. Yet, It was nothing more than the story of a voyage to India, followed by 2 or 3 trips to the Levant. His words moved forward until they reached the moment of his last cruise, the death of Captain Leclerc, the receipt of a packet meant for the Grand Marshal, and his meeting with that dignitary. The Marshal had taken the packet and, in return, handed him a letter addressed to Monsieur Noirtier. From there, Dantès recalled arriving in Marseilles, seeing his father again, and the warmth of his love for Mercedes. He remembered their wedding feast, and then the sudden arrest. He spoke of his first examination, the brief detention at the Palais de Justice, and finally, his imprisonment in the Château d'If. From that point onward, his mind was a void. He had no memory of what happened afterward, not even how long he had been confined. When his account ended, the abbé sat in deep, prolonged thought. The abbé reflected on the nature of human wrongdoing. He considered how evil rarely thrives in a pure heart, yet artificial society creates needs, vices, and false tastes powerful enough to suppress all good instincts, leading to guilt. From this came his conclusion: to find the author of a harmful act, first seek the person who might benefit from it. He asked Dantès to think, who could have gained from his disappearance? At first, Dantès believed no one could. He had considered himself insignificant, but the abbé pressed the idea that in every level of life, from kings to ordinary workers, each position carried its own rivalries and ambitions. In the maritime world, Dantès had been on the verge of becoming captain of the Pharaon and marrying a young, beautiful woman. Could someone have wished to stop those things? In examining the captaincy, Dantès admitted he had been liked by the crew, though only one man, Danglars, had ever shown ill will toward him. They had quarreled in the past, and Dantès had challenged him to fight, but Danglars refused. The abbé drew out further details. Danglars had been the ship's supercargo, and Dantès would not have kept him in that role due to suspected inaccuracies in his accounts. The abbé then probed the events surrounding Captain Leclerc's packet. No one else had been present in the cabin during the conversation, but the door had been opened. Dantès recalled Danglars passing at that very moment. At Elba, the Grand Marshal gave him a letter in exchange for the packet, which Dantès placed in his portfolio, though it had been left on the ship. He carried the letter in his hand from shore back to the vessel, visible to all, including Danglars. The abbé guided him to recall the exact words of the anonymous accusation. Dantès repeated them from memory, word for word. It accused him of carrying messages from Murat to the usurper and from the usurper to the Bonapartist club in Paris, advising immediate arrest. The abbé recognized the clarity of the plot and questioned Dantès about the handwriting. Dantès explained that Danglars normally wrote in a fine, running hand, but the anonymous letter had been written backhanded. The abbé demonstrated how such a disguise could be achieved by writing with the left hand, producing a result identical to the letter in question. Attention then turned to the second possible motive, preventing his marriage. Dantès admitted there had been a rival, Fernand, a Catalan who loved Mercedes. Yet he believed Fernand would have chosen violence over intrigue. Still, Dantès remembered seeing Danglars and Fernand together the night before the wedding, seated with Catullus, a drunken tailor. Pens, ink, and paper had been on their table. In that moment, the treachery became vivid in his mind. The abbé then moved to the greater mystery, why there had been no second examination, no trial, and no formal sentence, yet he was imprisoned. Dantès revealed that his examiner had been a young deputy prosecutor, about 26 or 27 years old, treating him with apparent mildness. The man had seemed troubled upon reading the incriminating letter and had even burned it, claiming to remove the only proof against him. This act, the abbé explained, was too perfect to be natural. He questioned to whom the letter had been addressed. Monsieur Noirtier, in Paris. Dantès recalled how the deputy had insisted he never speak of the letter or utter the name it bore. The abbé recognized the name from the days of the Revolution and pressed for the deputy's identity. When Dantès named him de Villefort, the abbé laughed in sudden clarity. He pointed out the obvious truth. The deputy had destroyed the letter to protect not Dantès, but himself. Noirtier was none other than Villefort's own father. The revelation struck Dantès with the force of a thunderbolt. At the abbé's words, horror froze him in place. He clasped his hands to his head as though to keep his mind from bursting, stunned by the truth that Villefort's father was Noirtier. In that instant, a light illuminated every mystery. The sudden change in Villefort's manner, the destruction of the letter, the forced promise of silence, the almost pleading tone that had sounded more like a request for mercy than the delivery of judgment. The memory overwhelmed him. Reeling like a drunken man, he withdrew to the passage leading to his cell, needing solitude to absorb the truth. Back in his dungeon, he sat rigid on his bed. The turnkey later found him hours later in that same posture. Eyes fixed, features tight, still as stone. Those hours of deep thought had passed for him like moments. Yet in them he had forged a terrible resolution, sealed by a solemn oath to himself. It was the abbé's voice that finally roused him. The elder prisoner had been visited by his jailer, and now came with an invitation to share his supper. Faria's reputation as harmlessly eccentric had won him small privileges, finer bread than the standard prison fare, and on Sundays, even a measure of wine. This was such a Sunday, and he wished to share his modest feast. Dantès followed. His face bore its usual calm, but something in his bearing revealed the fixed and desperate resolve within. The abbé studied him closely and regretted the information he had given, for it had planted in Dantès a new and dangerous passion, the thirst for vengeance. But at the young man's request, he turned the conversation to other matters. Faria spoke as one seasoned by hardship, yet free from self-pity. His words were rich with knowledge and practical wisdom, never dwelling on his own sorrows. Dantès listened with admiration. Some subjects he understood through his nautical experience. Others were entirely new to him, yet opened vistas in his mind like the glow of northern lights guiding a ship through dark seas. He began to appreciate the joy of following a mind as keen and well-traveled as the abbé's along the heights of truth. Dantès asked to be taught, partly to ease the abbé's solitude and partly to broaden his own mind. The older man agreed, though he insisted that human knowledge had limits. In 2 years, he said, he could pass on all he knew: mathematics, physics, history, and several modern languages. Dantès was astonished at the shortness of the time, but the abbé explained that principles could be learned quickly, even if their full application took longer. Philosophy itself, he added, could not be taught directly. It was the art of applying science to truth. They agreed to begin at once. That same evening they drew up a plan of study. Dantès proved a remarkable pupil. His prodigious memory, quick grasp, and natural skill with numbers blending with a poetic temperament that softened the severity of mathematics. Already fluent in Italian and familiar with Romaic from his travels, he used these as bridges to other tongues, and within 6 months was speaking Spanish, English, and German. True to his promise, Dantès never spoke again of escape. Whether it was the absorbing pleasure of study or the bond of his pledged word, he left the subject untouched. Days and months passed in a swift, enriching rhythm. After a year, he was transformed, yet he noticed a change in Faria. Despite the comfort of companionship, the abbé seemed more troubled, often pacing in silence, sighing, and falling into deep reveries. One day, Faria murmured that, if not for the sentinel, freedom might be possible. Dantès understood his unspoken thoughts, but found the abbé unwilling to shed blood, even for self-preservation. The idea returned again and again over the next 3 months, though Faria would not give consent. At last, he asked Dantès if he were strong, and the young man demonstrated by bending and straightening a chisel with ease. Satisfied, the abbé asked for his promise not to harm the guard unless forced. On that oath, the older man revealed that their escape might now be possible. The work, he warned, would take at least a year. They began immediately. Dantès lamented the lost time, but the abbé reminded him that the past year had been far from wasted. Then, he laid out the plan. The abbé unrolled a sketch he had long kept hidden, a careful plan of his cell, Dantès' cell, and the narrow passage that linked them. In that passage, he proposed to drive a horizontal tunnel, as miners do. This new level would lead them directly beneath the gallery, where the sentry kept watch. From there, they would hollow out a wide space and loosen one of the flagstones of the gallery floor until, at the chosen moment, it would give way under the soldiers' feet. The sentry, stunned by the fall, would be bound and gagged before he could resist. Then the prisoners would escape through one of the gallery's windows, descending the outer walls by means of the abbé's rope ladder. The simplicity and certainty of the plan lit Dantès' eyes with excitement. That very day, the two began their labors with the fierce energy of men long starved of purpose. Only the turnkey's visits interrupted their work. By now, they could recognize the faintest echo of his steps and be ready before he appeared. The earth they dug was finally crumbled and scattered through the window of either cell, letting the night wind carry it away without a trace. More than a year slipped by in this toil. Their tools were only a chisel, a knife, and a wooden lever. As they worked, Faria continued to instruct Dantès, switching between languages, recounting the histories of nations and the rise of great men. He carried the air of a man who had once moved in the highest circles, with a natural dignity that Dantès absorbed along with the polish of manner that only constant contact with refinement can teach. At last, after 15 months, the tunnel was complete. Beneath the gallery, they could clearly hear the sentinel's steady tread above. They waited now for a night dark enough to hide their flight. Their greatest fear was that the loosened flagstone might fall too soon, so they braced it with a small beam found in the walls they had broken through. Dantès was adjusting this support when he heard Faria call from his cell, his voice sharp with pain. Dantès hurried in and found the abbé pale as death, sweat streaming down his forehead, hands clenched tight. His eyes were sunken and ringed in purple, lips white as if bloodless, and even his hair seemed to rise. The abbé's breath came in short gasps. He told Dantès a terrible truth. He was seized by a violent illness, perhaps mortal. A similar attack had struck him before his imprisonment, and only one remedy existed. In his cell, hidden inside the hollowed foot of the bed, was a small phial half filled with a red liquid. Dantès must fetch it, yet fearing they might be discovered, the abbé urged him first to help him back to his own room while strength remained. With steady resolve, Dantès dragged and supported his companion through the passage and into the abbé's chamber, laying him gently on the bed. Faria shivered violently, explaining that he was about to be seized by catalepsy. When it reached its height, he might lie still as death, cold, rigid, silent, or fall into dreadful convulsions, foaming and crying out. If his cries were heard, they would be separated forever. Only when he became perfectly still should Dantès act, forcing open his teeth with a knife and pouring 8 to 10 drops from the phial into his mouth. Perhaps then he would revive. The word perhaps struck Dantès with grief. But before he could speak again, the abbé cried out, gasping for help, his words breaking as the attack began to overtake him. The sudden and violent nature of the seizure overwhelmed the unfortunate prisoner, leaving him unable to finish his sentence. His entire body convulsed uncontrollably. His eyes bulged wildly, his mouth twisted to one side, and his cheeks darkened to a deep purple. He thrashed about desperately, foamed to the mouth, and cried out with the most harrowing sounds imaginable. Yet, Dantès managed to muffle those dreadful cries by covering the prisoner's head with a blanket. This agonizing fit endured for 2 long hours. When it finally ceased, the prisoner lay more helpless than an infant, his skin colder and paler than marble, his body broken and crushed like a reed trampled underfoot. In one last shuddering convulsion, he curled up and became as rigid and motionless as a corpse. Edmond waited carefully until life seemed completely gone from his friend's body. Then, taking up a knife, he pried open the tightly clenched jaws with great difficulty. He administered the prescribed drops with cautious care and watched anxiously for any sign of recovery. An entire hour slipped by without the slightest indication of returning life. Fear crept into Dantès' heart, convinced he might have acted too late to save his friend. He ran his hands through his hair and stared silently at the friend's lifeless face. Finally, faint color began to return to the pale cheeks. Dull eyes slowly regained some awareness, and a weak sigh escaped from the lips. The prisoner made a feeble effort to move. Relief surged through Dantès as he realized his friend was saved. Though still unable to speak, the sick man gestured anxiously toward the door. Dantès listened intently and heard the unmistakable footsteps of the jailer approaching. It was nearly 7 o'clock, but all sense of time had vanished in the young man's mind, lost in worry for his friend's condition. Springing to the door, Dantès hurried through the entrance and carefully pulled the heavy stone back over the opening. Then, racing to his own cell, he arrived just moments before the jailer came in. The guard found the prisoner sitting as usual by the side of his bed, unaware of the crisis that had passed. Almost before the key turned in the lock and the jailer's footsteps faded down the long corridor, Dantès' restless concern drove him back to the abbé's chamber. Pressing his head against the stone, he raised it and slipped quietly to the sick man's side. Faria's consciousness had fully returned, but he remained helpless and utterly exhausted on his miserable bed. The abbé spoke with a weak voice, expressing surprise at seeing Dantès again. The young man questioned why he had doubted such a reunion, wondering if the abbé had thought himself near death. The abbé admitted he had no such expectation, but, knowing everything was prepared for their escape, he had thought Dantès might have fled alone. Dantès' cheeks flushed with indignation at the very suggestion. The abbé acknowledged his mistake, but lamented his exhaustion and frailty caused by the recent attack. Dantès offered comforting words, assuring the abbé that his strength would return. Sitting beside him and holding his hands, he tried to encourage hope, but the abbé shook his head sadly, explaining that the last attack had been shorter, only half an hour, and he had been able to get up and eat afterward without help. Now, however, his right arm and leg were completely immobile, and his head ached painfully, a clear sign of bleeding on the brain. He warned that a third attack would either claim his life or leave him paralyzed forever. Dantès refused to accept such a fate, declaring confidently that the abbé would not die and that if another attack came, it would find him free. He promised they would save him again, just as they had this time, only with a better chance, as they could command all necessary assistance. Yet the abbé, speaking gravely, urged Edmond not to be deceived. This latest seizure, he said, condemned him forever to prison walls. No one who cannot walk can escape a dungeon. Undeterred, Dantès said they would wait as long as needed, a week, a month, or even 2 months, until the abbé's strength returned. Everything was ready for their flight, and they could leave whenever he felt able to swim. But the abbé shook his head sadly, stating that he would never swim again. His arm was paralyzed, not temporarily, but for life. When Dantès lifted the arm, it fell back lifelessly, completely without motion. A heavy sigh escaped from him. The abbé asked if Edmond was now convinced, insisting that he knew the truth from careful reflection since the first attack. He explained that the illness was hereditary. Both his father and grandfather had died after a third attack. The physician who had prepared the remedy he had taken twice successfully was none other than the famous Cabanis, who had predicted a similar fate for him. Dantès firmly rejected the abbé's gloomy prediction about the physician's prognosis. He insisted that the doctor might be wrong. As for the abbé's paralyzed arm, Dantès believed it made no difference. Confident in his own strength as a swimmer and sailor, he declared that he could carry the abbé on his shoulders and swim for both of them. The abbé gently reminded the young man of harsh reality. Knowing both of their limitations well, he explained that a man burdened like that would sink before completing 50 strokes. He urged Dantès to stop clinging to empty hopes that even his own kind heart struggled to believe. The abbé accepted that he would remain in the prison until his hour of deliverance arrived, which, in all likelihood, would be the hour of his death. But for Dantès, young and vigorous, the abbé urged him not to delay on his account. He released Dantès from his promise and encouraged him to escape. Resolute and moved, Dantès declared that he would also stay. Rising solemnly, he extended his hand over the abbé's head and swore, invoking the blood of Christ, that he would never leave the abbé's side while he lived. Faria looked upon his noble, devoted young friend with deep affection. In Dantès' face, he saw full confirmation of the sincerity of his loyalty and the purity of his purpose. Gratefully, the abbé accepted the pledge. He warned that since neither of them would leave, it was necessary to conceal their secret carefully. The excavation beneath the soldier's gallery needed to be filled in, lest the soldier hear the hollow sound of footsteps and alert his officer. Such a discovery would inevitably separate them forever. The abbé charged Dantès to begin the work immediately. He urged him to labor through the night if necessary. Dantès was not to return until after the jailer's next visit, for the abbé promised to reveal something of great importance when they met again. Dantès took the abbé's hand with warmth and affection, pressing it gently. The abbé responded with an encouraging smile. With a spirit of obedience and respect, Dantès set about his task, determined to honor the trust placed in him by his aged friend. When Dantès returned the next morning to the chamber where his companion was held captive, he found Faria seated calmly. A narrow beam of light slipped through the small window of the cell, illuminating a sheet of paper in Faria's left hand, the only hand still under his control. The paper had been rolled repeatedly into a small cylinder, making it difficult to keep open. Without a word, Faria showed the paper to Dantès. Curious, Dantès examined it carefully and saw only a half-burnt piece of paper, marked with faint Gothic characters inscribed in an unusual kind of ink. Then, with a faint smile, Faria revealed that this paper was his treasure. He declared that, from this day forward, half of it belonged to Dantès. A cold sweat broke out on Edmond's brow. For a long time, he had avoided speaking about the treasure, knowing that it had caused others to accuse Faria of madness. Out of instinctive delicacy, Edmond had kept silent, and the old man had done the same. Edmond had taken Faria's quietness as a sign of returning reason. Yet, these few words after such a painful crisis seemed like a relapse in a mental confusion. Shaken, Edmond questioned the truth of this treasure, but Faria smiled gently, assuring him he was not mad. He insisted that the treasure was real and that though no one had believed him before, Edmond must trust him now. Edmond murmured to himself that this seemed like a terrible setback, fearing the worst. He suggested gently that his friend should rest and postpone the story until the following day, reminding him that there was no need to rush over a treasure. Yet, the old man insisted on its urgency. He warned that the dreaded third attack might come at any moment, ending everything. He spoke of the treasure's vast wealth, enough to enrich many families, and how, in his darkest hours of captivity, he had savored thoughts of vengeance against those who persecuted him. But now, for Edmond's sake, he had forgiven the world. Seeing the young man's promise and the future that could arise from this knowledge made him shudder at any delay. He trembled at the thought of failing to secure the treasure's possession for someone as worthy as Edmond. Edmond turned his face away with a heavy sigh, still unconvinced. Faria pressed on, aware that Edmond needed proof. He urged Edmond to read the paper, which had never been shown to another soul. Reluctant to indulge what he feared was madness, Edmond asked to wait until the next day to discuss the matter further. Faria agreed not to talk of it, but insisted that Edmond read the paper now. Yielding, Edmond took the damaged paper, half burnt, likely by accident, and read aloud the fragment, mentioning a treasure, possibly amounting to 2 of Roman crowns in the most distant of the second opening WH, declared to belong to him allo, heir. The document was dated April 25th, 149 foot, its last digit faded. When Dantès finished reading, Faria responded quietly but firmly. To Dantès, the paper appeared only as broken lines and disconnected words, charred by fire and largely illegible. Yet, to Faria, who had spent many sleepless nights studying it, the meaning was clear. He had painstakingly reconstructed every phrase and completed every thought from the fragments. When asked if he truly believed he had discovered the hidden meaning, Faria assured him he was certain. But before revealing more, he intended to share the full history behind the mysterious paper. Suddenly, Dantès grew alarmed by approaching footsteps. Seizing the moment, he slipped away quickly, eager to avoid hearing the explanation that he feared would only confirm his doubts about Faria's sanity. Meanwhile, Faria, stirred into action by the disturbance, pushed the stone back into place and covered it with a mat to conceal their secret. The visitor was the governor himself, who had come after hearing from the jailer about Faria's illness. Faria sat upright to greet him, carefully hiding any signs of paralysis that threatened his life. He feared the governor's pity might lead to his transfer to better quarters, which would separate him from Dantès. Fortunately, the governor remained convinced that Faria, whom he secretly liked despite his odd behavior, suffered only a minor indisposition and left without further action. Throughout the day, Edmond sat on his bed, head in hands, wrestling with conflicting thoughts. Since their first meeting, Faria had shown such rationality, logic, and remarkable insight that Edmond found it hard to reconcile such wisdom with the accusations of madness. He wondered whether Faria was deceived about the treasure or if the world was deceived about Faria. Determined to postpone the inevitable proof of madness, Edmond avoided visiting his friend all day. He hoped to delay the moment when he would have to accept that the abbé was truly mad, a conviction he dreaded deeply. But by evening, after the usual time for the jailer's visit had passed, Faria, seeing no sign of Edmond, struggled painfully to close the distance between their cells. His leg was useless, and one arm no longer responded. Hearing the old man's agonizing efforts, Edmond shuddered, but was forced to help him. Without assistance, Faria could not have entered through the small opening that led to Dantès' chamber. With a gentle smile, Faria reassured Edmond that he was relentless in pursuing him. The young man realized there was no escape and placed the abbé on his bed before sitting beside him. Faria began to recount his past. He explained that he had served as secretary and close friend to Cardinal Spada, the last prince of that name, to whom he owed all his happiness. Although the cardinal was not wealthy, his family's riches had become legendary. He lived off that reputation. His palace had been a paradise for Faria. As tutor to the cardinal's nephews, now deceased, Faria had devoted himself entirely to the cardinal's service during 10 years of unwavering kindness. The cardinal's house held no secrets for him. Faria had often seen the nobleman studying ancient volumes and eagerly searching through dusty family manuscripts. One day, when Faria reproached the cardinal for his futile searches and the toll they took on his spirit, the cardinal smiled bitterly. He opened a volume about the history of Rome and showed Faria a passage in the 20th chapter of the life of Pope Alexander VI. The text described how the great wars of Romagna had ended and how Caesar Borgia, having completed his conquest, needed money to purchase all of Italy. The Pope also needed funds to settle matters with Louis XII of France, who remained a formidable force despite setbacks. This dire situation required a profitable scheme, a difficult task in an exhausted Italy. The Pope devised a plan to create 2 new cardinals. By selecting 2 of Rome's wealthiest nobles, the Pope expected to sell their positions and the offices they held for profit. The 2 chosen were Giovanni Rospigliosi, holder of 4 high dignities of the Holy See, and Caesar Spada, one of the richest and noblest Roman nobles. Both men eagerly accepted the honor. Caesar Borgia quickly found buyers for their appointments. As a result, Rospigliosi and Spada paid to become cardinals, and 8 others paid for the offices the cardinals had vacated, bringing in 800,000 crowns to the scheme's masterminds. The time had come to reveal the final part of the story. The Pope showered honors upon Rospigliosi and Spada, granting them the insignia of the cardinalate and encouraging them to settle in Rome. Afterwards, the Pope and Caesar Borgia invited the 2 cardinals to dine with them. This plan sparked a disagreement between father and son. Caesar suggested using one of his usual methods, a special key given to trusted individuals to open a particular cupboard. This key had a small iron point, a flaw by the locksmith. When pressed against the cupboard's lock, a difficult one, the key's point would prick the opener, causing death the next day. Another method was a ring Caesar wore, set with a lion's head. When he shook hands with a friend while wearing this ring, the lion bit the hand, and the wound became fatal within 24 hours. Caesar proposed that they either ask the cardinals to open the cupboard or shake hands with them, but Pope Alexander VI disagreed. He argued that asking the cardinals to dinner would be better, as it promised a quicker return of the money. He reminded Caesar that indigestion showed up immediately, while the pricks or bites caused delays of days. Convinced by this reasoning, Caesar yielded, and the cardinals were invited to the meal. The dinner was arranged in a vineyard owned by the Pope near San Pierdarena, a charming spot well known by reputation. Rospigliosi, newly honored, arrived eager and charming. Spada, more cautious and deeply attached to his only nephew, a promising young captain, brought pen and paper to make his will. He sent word to his nephew to meet him near the vineyard, but the servant failed to find him. Spada understood the sinister meaning behind these invitations. Christianity had softened Rome, so no centurion came with a harsh message anymore. Instead, a smiling legate conveyed the Pope's polite request to dine. Around 2 o'clock, Spada set out for San Pierdarena, where the Pope awaited him. The first sight that greeted Spada was his nephew in full uniform, receiving marked attentions from Caesar Borgia. Spada's face went pale as Caesar regarded him with a mocking look, signaling that the trap was fully set. Dinner began, but Spada could only ask if his nephew had received his message. The nephew, understanding perfectly, replied that he had not. It was already too late. He had drunk a glass of excellent wine placed by the Pope's butler. At the same moment, another bottle was offered to Spada himself, who was urged to taste it. An hour later, a physician declared both men poisoned by mushrooms. Spada died on the vineyard's threshold, and his nephew passed away at his own door, making gestures his wife could not understand. Afterward, Caesar and the Pope rushed to seize the inheritance, supposedly looking for the deceased's papers. But the inheritance was merely a scrap of paper on which Spada had written that he bequeathed to his beloved nephew his coffers, books, and his gold-cornered breviary, to be kept as a remembrance. The heirs searched everywhere, admired the breviary, took the furniture, and were surprised that Spada, though rich in reputation, was a miserable uncle. No hidden treasures were found, only knowledge contained in his library and laboratories. Caesar and his father searched thoroughly, but found very little. Some silver plate and cash worth a few thousand crowns. The nephew, before dying, told his wife to look carefully among his uncle's papers for a will. They searched even more carefully than the high heirs had done, but all efforts were fruitless. The family possessed 2 palaces and a vineyard near the Palatine Hill, but at the time, landed property held little value. These remained with the family, safe from the Pope and his son's greed. Months and years passed. Alexander VI died by poisoning through a well-known error. Caesar was poisoned at the same time, but survived by shedding his skin like a snake, though the new skin was spotted and tiger-like. Forced to flee Rome, he was eventually killed in a little-noticed night skirmish. After the Pope's death and Caesar's exile, the Spada family was expected to regain their former grandeur. But this did not happen. They remained in uncertain comfort. A dark mystery hung over the affair, with rumors that Caesar, a better politician than his father, had taken a fortune for himself. Cardinal Rospigliosi, who took no precautions, was completely stripped. Interrupting his tale, Faria acknowledged this might seem confusing so far, but Dantès, far from bored, urged him to continue eagerly. Faria resumed. Over the years, the family faded into obscurity. Descendants became soldiers, diplomats, clergy, bankers, some rich, some ruined. He then spoke of the last of the line, the Count of Spada, whom he served as secretary. The Count often lamented how his rank outweighed his fortune and took advice to invest his wealth in an annuity, doubling his income. The famous breviary remained in the family and in the Count's possession. It had been passed down through generations and was regarded with almost superstitious reverence due to a unique clause in the only will found. It was an illuminated book with beautiful Gothic letters, so heavily adorned with gold that a servant always carried it before the cardinal on solemn occasions. Faced with numerous family papers, titles, contracts, parchments inherited from the poisoned cardinal, Faria sifted through vast archives like many stewards before him. Despite exhaustive searching, he found nothing. He had even written a detailed history of the Borgia family to check for any gains from the cardinal's death, but only traced property acquisitions of Cardinal Rospigliosi, not Spada. Almost convinced that the inheritance had neither enriched the Borgias nor the family, but remained lost like Arabian Nights treasures guarded by genies beneath the earth, Faria searched, calculated income and expenses over 3 centuries, without success. Both he and the Count of Spada remained in ignorance and poverty. When his patron died, he bequeathed to Faria his family papers, a library of 5,000 volumes, the famous breviary, and 1,000 Roman crowns in cash. In return, Faria was to arrange anniversary masses for his soul and compile a genealogy and history of the family. He fulfilled these duties meticulously. Faria assured Edmond that the story was nearing its conclusion. In 1807, a month before Faria's arrest and 2 weeks after the Count's death, on December 25th, a date forever fixed in his memory, Faria was, for the 1,000th time, organizing papers. The family palace had been sold to a stranger, and Faria planned to leave Rome for Florence with 12,000 francs, his library, and the breviary. Exhausted from his labor and a heavy meal, he fell asleep with his head resting on his hands around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Faria woke as the clock struck 6. Raising his head, he found himself in complete darkness. He called for a light, but no one answered. Resolving to find one on his own, he prepared for the simple means he would soon have to adopt. With one hand, he held a wax candle, while the other searched for a piece of paper. His matchbox was empty. He intended to use the small flame still glowing on the embers to ignite the paper. Hesitant to waste any valuable paper, he paused. Then, recalling the famous breviary on the table beside him, he remembered an old, yellowed slip of paper that had served as a bookmark for centuries, placed there at the heir's request. Feeling for it, he found the paper, rolled it up, and set it into the dying flame. As the fire spread beneath his fingers, a remarkable thing happened. Yellowish characters appeared on the paper as if by magic. Faria quickly grasped it, extinguished the flame, lit his candle from the embers, and carefully unfolded the crumpled sheet with intense emotion. He recognized the characters as those written in a mysterious, sympathetic ink, which only revealed itself when exposed to fire. Nearly a third of the paper had burned away. This was the same paper Dantès had read earlier. Faria urged him to read it once more, promising to fill in the missing words and clarify the fragmented meaning. Faria, with a look of triumph, handed the fragile paper to Dantès. This time, Edmond read carefully the faded words, traced in an ink that looked like rusty red. The letter was dated April 25th, 1498, and mentioned Pope Alexander VI. It suggested that the Pope, worried about his successor, might want to name someone as his heir. It spoke of secret dangers and the fate of 2 cardinals who were poisoned. The writer declared his nephew, Guido Spada, as his sole heir. He revealed that he had hidden a great treasure in a place known only to himself and his heir, the caves on the small island of Monte Cristo. The treasure included vast amounts of gold ingots, money, jewels, diamonds, and gems, riches so enormous they could reach nearly 2 million Roman crowns. The letter gave directions. By raising the 20th rock from a small creek to the east in a straight line, 2 openings would be found in the caves. The treasure was hidden in the furthest opening of the second cave. The writer bequeathed this entire fortune to his nephew, Guido Spada, as a sole heir. Then, the abbé gave Dantès another fragment of paper, torn and faded, with incomplete lines. Edmond read these broken phrases aloud. They mentioned invitations to dine by His Holiness, complaints about paying for a cardinal's hat, and the fate of Cardinals Caprera and Benivoglio, who had been poisoned. The fragment also contained Guido Spada's name, a declaration naming him heir, and references to hidden treasure in the caves of the small island, including ingots, gold, and money. The fragments hinted at the huge fortune and secret hiding place, confirming the earlier paper's message. Faria watched Edmond with eager eyes. When Edmond finished reading, the abbé urged him to piece the 2 fragments together and judge for himself. Edmond obeyed, joining the torn papers carefully. The combined text revealed the full story, a hidden treasure entrusted by the writer to his nephew Guido Spada, concealed in the caves on the island of Monte Cristo, with detailed clues for finding it. This discovery marked a crucial moment for Edmond. What had once been confusing scraps of paper now formed a clear map to unimaginable wealth. Wealth that promised hope, justice, and the possibility of freedom. Faria asked Edmond if he now understood the importance of the document before them. Edmond, still doubtful, recognized it as the declaration of Cardinal Spada, the will they had been searching for so long. Faria confirmed this with great certainty. He explained that he had completed the document himself. Using the remaining fragment, he guessed the rest by measuring the line lengths against the paper. He uncovered the hidden meaning as one might be guided in a dark cavern by a small ray of light above. Faria then revealed that upon reaching this conclusion, he decided to leave immediately. He carried with him the beginning of his great work, the unity of the Italian kingdom. However, the imperial police had been watching him. They suspected something because of his sudden departure, which they could not explain. Consequently, he was arrested just as he was leaving Piombino. Addressing Edmond with a fatherly look, Faria said that now Edmond knew as much as he did. If they ever escaped together, half the treasure would belong to Edmond. If Faria died and Edmond escaped alone, the entire fortune would be his. Edmond hesitated and asked whether there was any other rightful owner of the treasure. Faria reassured him there was not. The family was extinct. The last Count of Spada had made Faria his heir, leaving him the symbolic breviary and all it contained. They could claim the fortune without guilt. The treasure was said to be 2 million Roman crowns, almost 13 million in their currency. Edmond was shocked by the vast amount. Faria questioned why Edmond found it impossible. He explained that the Spada family was one of the oldest and most powerful families of the 15th century. At that time, large collections of gold and jewels were common investments. Even today, some Roman families starve despite owning millions in diamonds and jewels that are tied up in inheritance laws and inaccessible to them. Edmond felt caught between disbelief and joy, as if dreaming. Faria revealed that he had kept this secret from Edmond to test his character and surprise him later. Had they escaped before his illness, Faria would have led Edmond to Monte Cristo himself. Now, with a sigh, he said Edmond would have to lead him there. When Edmond did not thank him, Faria gently reproached him. Edmond insisted the treasure belonged only to Faria, saying he had no right to it since they were not related. Faria corrected him, calling Edmond his son, the child born from his captivity, bound by vows of celibacy. Faria said God sent Edmond to comfort both the man who could not be a father and the prisoner who could not gain freedom. Faria extended his only usable arm, and Edmond embraced him tightly, weeping.